The keys to a brand new sedan feel surprisingly light in my palm, almost weightless considering they represent the sum of 1,000 lonely nights and 1,000,000 lines of code. People have this idea that being retired at 25 means yachts and champagne parties. For me, it just means I'm sitting in the leather-scented quiet of my own car, across the street from a Honda dealership, about to do the single most important thing I've ever done with my money. It's funny, the word they used for me back in high school wasn't genius or prodigy, it was weirdo. Sometimes, if they were feeling particularly creative, code freak. I guess I was. While everyone else was navigating the clumsy politics of adolescence, I was navigating nested loops and debugging syntax errors until 3 a.m. The clean, predictable logic of a compiler was my sanctuary. It made sense in a way that people never did. I didn't have friends, not really. I had dependencies, variables, and functions. My social life was a command line interface. The other kids saw a ghost in a hoodie, hunched over a laptop in the corner of the library, fingers flying in a blur they couldn't comprehend. They saw my screen filled with what looked like an alien language and kept their distance, occasionally punctuating the silence with a muttered insult or a well-aimed spitball. I learned to build firewalls, both in my code and around myself. Most teachers saw a problem child, a student who was physically present but mentally logged into another dimension. They'd drone on about Shakespeare or the quadratic formula, and I'd be mentally architecting a database schema. All of them, that is, except one. Mr. Harrison. He taught world history, of all things. A rumpled, kind-eyed man who saw past the hoodie and the screen. He never told me to put my laptop away. Instead, he'd lean over my shoulder after the bell rang, his coffee-scented breath fogging up my screen, and ask, "What are you building today, son?" He didn't understand a lick of it, but he understood the passion. He saw the fire. While everyone else was trying to extinguish it, he was the only one who gently fanned the flames. He's the reason I'm here, staring at that dealership. He's the reason I'm about to buy a car for a man who still drives the same beat-up, 20-year-old Toyota Camry he drove when I was a freshman, the one that always smelled faintly of chalk dust and old books. This isn't about showing off. This is about paying a debt that no amount of money can ever truly repay. I saw that Camry last week, actually. It was parked outside the public library, the same one where I spent most of my teenage years hiding. The back bumper was held on with duct tape and a prayer. One of the hubcaps was missing, and the paint was so faded it looked like it was sighing. I saw him get in, turn the key, and then nothing. Just the pathetic, grinding groan of a starter giving up the ghost. He just rested his forehead on the steering wheel for a long moment. That image is what solidified this whole plan. It's not just that he deserves a new car, it's that he needs one. He's still shaping lives, still fanning flames for other weird kids in hoodies, and he can't even reliably get to the school where he does it. The memory of him defending me is as sharp as any line of code I've ever written. It was junior year. I was in the library, deep into a personal project, trying to build a rudimentary encryption algorithm. A guy named Mark, who was the kind of popular that's built on tearing other people down, sauntered over with his friends. He leaned over my shoulder, a cloud of cheap cologne and condescension. "Still playing with your little nerd toys, freak?" he sneered, and then he did something I'll never forget. He reached over and slammed my laptop shut, right in the middle of a compile. The sound of the plastic cracking against the keyboard echoed in the silent library. My heart seized. Hours of work, potentially corrupted. Before I could even react, Mr. Harrison, who was grading papers at a nearby table, was on his feet. "Mark," he said, his voice quiet but with an edge of steel I'd never heard before. "What he is doing in here is more important than anything you will likely achieve in the next 10 years. Pick on someone your own size." Mark just scoffed and swaggered away, but the damage was done. I just stared at my closed laptop, feeling that familiar hot shame creep up my neck. Mr. Harrison came over, put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't you ever let them make you feel small for being smart. Open it up. Let's see if we can save it." It's amazing how one person's kindness can be the firewall you need. You know, if you've ever had someone in your corner like that, or if you just get what it's like to feel like you're on the outside, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It's just nice to know there are people out there who understand. I took a deep breath, the new car smell filling my lungs. Time to go pay that debt. I opened the door. The click of the door latch felt definitive. I stepped out onto the asphalt, the warm afternoon sun hitting my face. The dealership across the street gleamed, a palace of polished chrome and plate glass. My plan was simple. Walk in, find the manager, explain the situation, and pay for a top-of-the-line Accord in cash. No fuss, no fanfare, just a transaction. A quiet closing of a loop that had been open for a decade. I was halfway across the 4-lane road when I saw him. He was standing near the entrance, leaning against a pillar, talking to another salesman. Older, a little heavier, his hair starting to thin, but unmistakably him. Mark. He was wearing a slightly too tight polyester suit and a laminated name tag. The cheap cologne I remembered had been replaced by the scent of desperation and stale coffee. He wasn't a customer, he worked here. For a second, my feet froze in the middle of the crosswalk. The universe has a sick sense of humor. Of all the dealerships in all the cities, it had to be this one. A car horn blared, snapping me back to reality, and I hurried to the safety of the sidewalk. He hadn't seen me yet. I could turn around, get back in my car, drive to the next town, find a different dealership, keep this clean, keep it pure. But then he turned his head. His eyes scanned the lot and landed on me. There was a flicker of confusion, then a slow, dawning recognition that curdled into a smirk. The exact same smirk from the library. He pushed himself off the pillar and sauntered over, his gait a pathetic echo of the high school swagger he once possessed. "Well, well, well," he said, his voice carrying the same condescending tone I remembered. He looked me up and down, taking in my simple jeans and t-shirt. "Look what the cat dragged in, the code freak. Didn't think they let your kind out in the daylight." He gestured vaguely at the cars around us. "Here to trade in your mom's minivan? Let me guess, you need something with good fuel economy for all those trips to the comic book store." My throat went dry. The air felt thick and heavy, just like it did in the library that day. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and run, to retreat back into the safety of my own world, behind my own firewalls. But then I saw it, just over his shoulder. Through the glass doors of the showroom, I could see the crisp, clean lines of a brand new sedan, the same model I'd picked out online. And I thought of Mr. Harrison, his head on the steering wheel of his dying Camry. Mark wasn't done. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Seriously though, what are you doing here? Did you finally get a real job?" He poked a thumb back at the dealership. "Maybe I can get you an interview. We need guys to wash the cars. It's simple work, even you could probably handle it." And that was it. That was the moment. The quiet act of gratitude I had planned evaporated, and in its place, a cold, hard certainty crystallized in my chest. This wasn't just about Mr. Harrison anymore. This was about the ghost in the hoodie. This was for the kid who had his laptop slammed shut. This was the final compile. The shame that had been a shadow at my heels for 10 years burned away, replaced by a glacial calm. I looked past Mark, my eyes locking onto the showroom, and my simple plan became an unbreakable vow. I wasn't just going to buy a car, I was going to buy it here. And he was going to watch me do it. I held his gaze, the glacial calm inside me a stark contrast to the heat rising in my cheeks. "I'm not here for an interview, Mark," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. I tried to step around him, my eyes fixed on the glass doors of the showroom. My new plan was simple: get to the manager, bypass this human syntax error completely. Mark sidestepped, blocking my path again. "Whoa there, Speedy. Everyone wants to talk to the manager. That's not how it works. You talk to a sales associate first." Lucky for you. He spread his arms wide, the polyester of his suit jacket straining at the seams. "I'm the best you're gonna get." I took a breath, forcing myself to stay level. "I don't want to talk to a sales associate. I want to speak to your manager, now." My directness seemed to throw him. He blinked, and for a second, the high school bully was replaced by a flustered, middle-aged car salesman. But the smirk returned almost instantly. "Look, pal, I don't know what your problem is, but the manager, Mr. Henderson, doesn't talk to every walk-in who thinks he's a big shot. He's busy." "He'll want to talk to me," I said, just as a portly man in a much nicer suit emerged from a back office holding a clipboard. He had the air of someone in charge. This was my chance. I moved past a stunned Mark and walked straight toward him. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet hum of the showroom. "Are you the manager?" The man, Henderson, looked me up and down. His eyes, small and shrewd, cataloged my plain t-shirt and worn jeans. It was a look I knew well, a human compiler scanning for errors in social standing. "I'm the sales manager. Can I help you?" His tone was already dismissive. "Yes, I'd like to purchase a new Honda Accord, the touring model, in cash," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But I'd prefer to complete the transaction with you. I don't want to work with him." I gave a slight nod back toward Mark, who was now hovering near the door, a look of outrage on his face. I expected a flicker of interest at the words "in cash," a moment of professional curiosity. Instead, Henderson's lips thinned into an impatient line. He glanced at Mark, who gave a slight shake of his head, a gesture that said, "This guy's a waste of time." Henderson turned back to me, his expression hardening. "Son," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "Mark is one of my top salesmen. If you have a problem with him, you probably have a problem with our dealership. We don't appreciate people coming in here and trying to cause trouble for our staff." My stomach turned cold. Trouble. I was trying to give them nearly $40,000. The logic wasn't compiling. "I'm not causing trouble. I'm a customer. I just have a preference." "Your preference," he cut me off, "is to not waste my time. Now Mark can show you our pre-owned inventory. Maybe there's a Civic in your budget." He clapped Mark on the shoulder as he walked past me. "Mark, take care of our guest." The system had failed. The formal chain of command, the simple logic of commerce, it all dissolved in the face of a cheap suit and a high school grudge. I was standing in the middle of a gleaming showroom, with enough money in my account to buy half the cars on the lot, and I had just been dismissed as a nuisance. The fear I felt wasn't for my safety. It was the suffocating fear of being powerless, of being unseen. The old shame, the hot, prickling feeling of being the weirdo in the corner, came rushing back. The world hadn't changed. I had built a fortress of wealth, but all it took was one person from my past to remind me that I was still the ghost in the hoodie, and they were still the ones who made the rules. Mark's smirk was now one of pure, unadulterated triumph. He had been validated by his boss. He had won. And I was left standing there, my simple act of gratitude curdling into something else entirely. Something cold and sharp, and much, much more expensive. He sauntered toward me, the picture of smug satisfaction. "See, like I said, Mr. Henderson's a busy man, doesn't have time for games." He jerked his thumb toward the sun-bleached asphalt of the used car lot. "Now come on, let's go find something in your price range. I won't even tell him you were a jerk." I didn't say a word. The logic of the situation was broken, the system corrupted by a single, malicious variable. There was no point trying to debug it here. I turned my back on him and walked out of the showroom, the automatic doors sliding shut behind me with a soft hiss, sealing me out. The afternoon sun felt harsh now, unforgiving. I just wanted to get back to the quiet, leather-scented solitude of my car, to retreat behind my firewall and pretend this never happened. "Hey! Where do you think you're going?" Mark's voice followed me out. I kept walking, my footsteps echoing my own heartbeat in my ears. "Don't be like that. I'm trying to help you out here." I ignored him, focusing on the path back to my car, parked in a prime spot near the entrance. I pulled the keys from my pocket. They felt heavier now. As I hit the unlock button, the headlights of my new G80 flashed, a silent beacon in the sea of Hondas. Mark stopped dead in his tracks. I could feel his eyes on me, then on the car. "No," he muttered, his voice a mix of confusion and disbelief. "No way. That's not. Is that yours?" I didn't answer. I just wanted him to leave me alone. But he walked toward it, circling it like a predator sizing up its prey. He ran his hand across the hood, a greasy, violating smear on the pristine paint. A Genesis G80? Fully loaded, by the looks of it, he said, his voice laced with a new, ugly kind of envy. How the hell does a freak like you afford a car like this? That was it. He was touching my car. He was in my space. The one place I felt safe. Get your hand off my car, I said, my voice low and tight. He laughed, a short, sharp bark, and leaned his full weight against the driver's side door, right below the window. The car's suspension creaked in protest. Or what? You gonna write a nasty email about me? He rapped his knuckles on the glass, right where my head would be. Come on, tell me. Mommy and Daddy buy you a nice graduation present? Or did you finally figure out how to hack an ATM? He leaned in, his voice dropping to that same conspiratorial whisper from before, reeking of cheap coffee and malice. I know your type. All quiet and weird. You probably ripped this off, didn't you? Hacked some company, stole some money. It's the only way. He slammed his hand flat against the window, the sound a dull thud that echoed the crack of my laptop lid all those years ago. He wasn't just insulting me. He was attacking the one thing I ever had. The code. The work. The 1,000 lonely nights that built this life. The very thing Mr. Harrison told me to be proud of, Mark was calling a crime. The shame and powerlessness evaporated, burned away by a sudden Arctic rage. The plan wasn't just to pay a debt anymore. A simple transaction was no longer enough. This required a demonstration. I wasn't the ghost in the hoodie anymore. I was the architect of the system, and he was a bug. It was time for a patch. I looked at him, still leaning against my car, a triumphant sneer on his face. I looked past him, at Henderson, watching us from inside the showroom. Then, I took out my phone. My fingers flew across the screen, not with the panic of a cornered kid, but with the cold precision of a coder, executing a root command. You're right, Mark, I said, my voice calm and clear. You shouldn't have to deal with customers like me. I found what I was looking for, the corporate directory, the regional VP, the direct line to the owner of the entire chain of dealerships. I'll make sure you never have to again. Mark's sneer faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. What are you talking about? You and Mr. Henderson, I said, my thumb swiping through my contacts. You think you're the gatekeepers. You're not. You're a temporary error in the system. My fingers paused over a name, Arthur Vance. I'd met him at a tech conference a year ago. He wasn't just the owner of this dealership. He owned the entire Vance Auto Group, a chain of 24 across the state. We'd talked for 20 minutes about network infrastructure. He'd given me his personal cell. Mark laughed, but it was a brittle, nervous sound. You gonna call the manager? I already told you he's busy. You gonna call the cops? Go ahead, tell them the nerd got his feelings hurt. I didn't answer. I just pressed the call button. It rang twice. Arthur, hi. It's the kid who told you your customer data was under-encrypted. Hope I'm not interrupting. I kept my eyes locked on Mark. His face went pale. The blood drained from it so fast he looked like a ghost in a cheap suit. I listened for a moment. I'm good, thanks. Listen, I'm at your Honda dealership in Northwood. I came to buy a car for an old teacher of mine. An Accord Touring. And I was thinking of upgrading my own. Maybe that new Acura MDX Type S. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. But my experience here has been suboptimal. Your sales manager, a Mr. Henderson, and his top salesman Mark seem to think my money isn't green enough. From inside the showroom, I could see Henderson staring, his phone now pressed to his ear. He was probably getting a call from his own terrified internal system. No, don't worry about them. I continued into the phone, my voice level. I just figured you'd want to be here. I'm about to make it the single most profitable afternoon in this dealership's history, and I'd like to make sure the commission goes to someone who understands the basic principle of a transaction. I listened. Great, I'll wait. I ended the call and slid the phone back into my pocket. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. Mark stood frozen, his hand still resting on my car, but now it looked less like an act of dominance and more like he was holding on for support. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The bully was gone. In his place was just a scared, middle-aged man who had just slammed the door on the wrong person. He finally understood. I wasn't a customer he could dismiss. I was a condition in the code he couldn't control. This was the moment of truth. The point where the system either corrects itself or crashes completely. It wasn't about the money or the cars anymore. It was about the look on Mark's face, the slow, horrifying dawn of understanding that the world he knew, the one where he was on top and I was at the bottom, had just been irrevocably inverted. He had spent his life believing in a certain kind of power, and I had just demonstrated a kind he couldn't even comprehend. 5 minutes passed, 10. Then a low rumble grew from down the street. A sleek, black Audi RS7, a car that made my Genesis look like a family sedan, turned into the dealership lot. It didn't park in a space. It pulled right up onto the curb in the fire lane, stopping directly in front of the showroom doors. The engine shut off, and a man in a perfectly tailored Italian suit stepped out. Arthur Vance. His eyes scanned the lot, found me, and then settled on Mark, who looked like he was about to be physically ill. Mr. Vance gave me a slight, almost imperceptible nod, his expression a mask of cold, quiet fury. The final compile had begun. Arthur Vance didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He walked past my car, his gaze sweeping over Mark's handprint on the window, and stopped directly in front of Henderson, who had scurried out of the showroom. Mark was still glued to my driver's side door, looking like a man who had just seen the server logs of his own termination. "Henderson," Vance said, his voice a low, dangerous hum, "I believe I pay you a rather substantial salary to manage sales, not to turn them away." "Mr. Vance, why?" "There was a misunderstanding," Henderson stammered, his face a blotchy red. This gentleman was being disruptive. He was making unreasonable demands. "He demanded to buy 2 of our most expensive vehicles," Vance said, his voice dropping another degree. "And you, in your infinite wisdom, decided that was an unreasonable request. Is that the new company policy?" Henderson's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Vance's cold eyes shifted to Mark. "And you, my top salesman, you decided to insult a man who could likely buy this entire franchise as a weekend toy. You leaned on his car. You accused him of theft. It wasn't a question, 'Give me your name tag.'" Mark flinched as if struck. He fumbled with the plastic clip on his lapel, his fingers trembling. He held it out. Vance didn't take it. He just stared at it, then back at Mark's face. "Leave it on. I want everyone to know who you are when you clean out your desk." Vance turned to me then, and the fury in his expression vanished, replaced by crisp, professional efficiency. "I apologize for the incompetence of my staff. Now, you said an Accord Touring and an MDX Type S? What colors?" The world snapped back into focus. This was it, the execution of the code. "The Accord in Canyon River Blue," I said, my voice clear and steady, "and the MDX in Apex Blue Pearl." "Excellent choices," Vance said. He scanned the showroom, his eyes passing over the other predatory salesmen who were trying to look busy. His gaze landed on a young woman barely out of her teens, nervously wiping down the counter of an empty reception desk. She looked terrified, like she was trying to become invisible. "You," Vance called out. She froze. "What's your name?" "Jessica, sir," she whispered. "Jessica," Vance said, a slight smile touching his lips for the first time. "Congratulations, you just sold 2 top-of-the-line vehicles. You'll be taking the full commission on both. Now please go get the paperwork started. I'll handle the financing." He pulled out his own phone, tapped the screen a few times, and looked at me. "What's the name for the Accord's registration?" "Harrison," I said. "Mr. Robert Harrison." The next 30 minutes were a masterclass in ruthless efficiency. Vance personally walked me to the finance office, waving away the stunned employee and sitting down at the desk himself. He brought up the contracts on his monitor, Jessica hovering nervously at his side. Mark and Henderson were ordered to bring the two cars to the front, to wash and detail them personally, and to fill them both with gas. I watched them through the office window, two ghosts in suits, scrubbing at phantom smudges under the harsh afternoon sun, while Jessica, her face a mask of dazed disbelief, initialed the spots Vance pointed to. There was no talk of credit checks or payment plans. I transferred the full amount, a number with 6 digits, from my phone. The bank notification chimed on Vance's computer less than a second later. The logic was pure, clean, and undeniable. A transaction, an input and an output. Vance printed 2 sets of keys and handed them to me, one for the Acura, one for the Accord. "Again," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "my apologies and my thanks. If you ever decide you want to do more than just point out my network vulnerabilities, my door is always open." I walked out of the office, the keys feeling solid and real in my palm. Mark was standing by the fully detailed Accord, holding the door open. His face was a hollowed-out mask of humiliation. The smirk was gone. The swagger was gone. All that was left was the weirdo, the code freak, who he had tried to keep out, standing before him as the man who now owned his career. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't say a word to him. I didn't have to. The code had compiled. The bug was fixed. I walked past him, got into my new Acura, and placed the keys for the Accord on the passenger seat. I didn't look back as I pulled out of the dealership. I had a debt to pay, and for the first time, it felt like I finally had the right currency. The new car smell, a sterile mix of leather and plastic, did little to mask the coppery taste of adrenaline in my mouth. My hands were clamped to the steering wheel, but they felt like they belonged to someone else. They were trembling, a low-frequency vibration that resonated up my arms. The sleek, silent power of the Acura felt alien as I merged onto the freeway, a world away from the chaotic, ugly scene I'd just orchestrated. I had won. There was no other word for it. The look on Mark's face as he held the door open for me, a hollowed-out crater of a man, was a more complete victory than I could have ever coded. The fear in Henderson's eyes was the final, successful compile of a program I'd started writing 10 years ago in a silent library. The system that had failed me, the one based on social status and cheap suits, had been bypassed entirely. I had found a root-level exploit named Arthur Vance and executed it with absolute precision. But the triumph felt jagged. It wasn't the clean, quiet satisfaction of solving a complex problem. It was messy, human, and loud. The rage that had burned so cold and bright was gone, and the space it left behind felt vast and empty. I felt the sudden, dizzying drop of an adrenaline crash, like stepping off a cliff in a dream. I had to pull over. I took the next exit, finding a deserted corner of a strip mall parking lot, and put the car in park. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, just as I'd seen Mr. Harrison do in his broken-down Camry. The quiet of the cabin was absolute. There were no authorities to call, no evidence to present. The system I had fought wasn't a legal one, it was a social one. The police couldn't arrest someone for making you feel small. There was no 911 for a decade of humiliation. The only evidence was the hollow feeling in my gut and the 2 sets of keys in my possession. My eyes fell to the passenger seat. Lying there, separate from the keys to my own new car, was the set for the Accord. The little silver Honda logo seemed to catch the light, a small, unassuming symbol of the original plan. This was the signal in all the noise. This was the reason. Before Mark, before Henderson, before all the anger and the power plays, there was just a simple act of gratitude waiting to be completed. My breathing steadied. The shaking in my hand subsided. The conflict hadn't been me against Mark. It had been a system bug, a malicious piece of code that had tried to insert itself into the main function. I hadn't gone there for a fight. I had gone there to deliver a payload. And I had dealt with the bug. Ruthlessly, yes, but it was dealt with. I picked up the keys to the Accord. They felt warm in my palm, heavier than their physical weight. This was the evidence. This was how the system was supposed to work. Not the one of salesmen and managers, but the one where kindness is a debt, and you spend your life looking for a way to repay it. I started the car again, the engine a low, confident hum. I put Mr. Harrison's address into the navigation. The route appeared on the screen, a clean, logical path forward. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a quiet, focused calm. The messy, ugly part was over. Now, it was time for the payoff. That night, sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I wasn't in my quiet, minimalist bedroom. I was back in that parking lot. I didn't see Mark's face. Not exactly. I saw a line of buggy code, a single, repeating error, backquote. Object reference not set to an instance of an object, backquote. A null pointer exception. A man who amounted to nothing. And I saw my own hand on the keyboard, hitting delete, not fixing the bug, but erasing the entire function it was in. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't clever. It was brute force. The rage that had felt so pure and righteous at the dealership had curdled into something sour and shameful. I got out of bed and went to my desk, my fingers itching for the familiar comfort of a keyboard. For years, coding was my sanctuary. It was the one place where the rules were absolute and logic was king. I could build worlds, solve puzzles, create order from chaos. It was clean. I opened my laptop and pulled up a simple project, a little algorithm I'd been tinkering with for fun, but the comfort wasn't there. The screen's glow felt interrogative. The blinking cursor felt like a judgment. I saw the lines of C# not as a language of creation, but as a weapon. Each function was a potential threat, each variable a point of leverage. My own skill, the very thing that had been my shield against the world, now felt tainted. Mark's words echoed in the silent room. A ghost in my machine. You probably ripped this off, didn't you? Hacked some company, stole some money. It wasn't true, but it felt true. I hadn't hacked a bank, but I had used a privileged access token, my personal connection to Arthur Vance, to execute a command that resulted in the complete social and professional destruction of two people. I had found a zero-day exploit in their lives and used it without a second thought. The clean logic of the compiler had been my guide, but I had applied it to the messy, illogical hardware of human beings, and it had fried their circuits completely. The pride I felt in my work, the quiet satisfaction Mr. Harrison had always encouraged, was gone. It had been replaced by the sick, metallic taste of power. I slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing the crack of plastic from a decade ago, but this time, I was the one causing the damage. The sanctuary was no longer safe. I had brought the monster in with me. I sat there in the dark, staring at the closed lid of my laptop. The silence in the room was absolute, a perfect vacuum where the comforting clack of my keyboard should have been. My sanctuary had been breached, and the intruder was me. The feeling wasn't triumph. It was a kind of digital hangover, the nauseating aftermath of executing a command that had run too hot, too fast, and broken everything it touched. My phone buzzed on the desk, a jarring intrusion, an unknown number. I ignored it. It buzzed again a minute later, a text this time. My hands felt heavy as I picked it up. Backquote, please. This is Henderson. I need 5 minutes of your time. Backquote. My stomach clenched. It was like a piece of deleted code, trying to reassert itself from the recycle bin. A ghost in the machine I had just exorcised. Every instinct told me to block the number, to reinforce the firewall, and let the error die. But the shame I felt wasn't just about what I'd done to him, it was about what I'd become. A brute with a root password. I couldn't fix the code in my own head by running away. I needed to face the exception I had caused. I texted back a single address, a small, quiet coffee shop halfway between my place and the dealership. 20 minutes. He was already there when I arrived, hunched over a table in the corner, looking 10 years older than he had the day before. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by a rumpled polo shirt. He looked smaller, deflated. He stood up when he saw me, his hands fidgeting with a paper cup. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice raspy. "I didn't sit. You have 5 minutes." I just want you to know I'm sorry," he stammered. "What I did, how I treated you, it was wrong. Unprofessional. There's no excuse. He looked down at his hands. I have a family, a mortgage. I've been with the Vance Group for 15 years. I'm asking you, please, will you talk to him? Tell him it was a mistake. A one-time lapse in judgment. The logic was flawed. A plea based on emotion, on personal consequence. It was the human equivalent of trying to justify a syntax error by saying the code had a bad day. The old me, the kid in the library, would have frozen, overwhelmed by the messy, illogical data stream of another person's desperation. But the cold clarity from the dealership hadn't entirely left me. It wasn't a lapse, I said, my voice flat. It was a protocol, your standard operating procedure. Let's debug it. Walk me through your logic. He stared at me, confused. My logic? You saw me, a young guy in a t-shirt and jeans. Your system immediately flagged me as low value, correct? He flinched but nodded numbly. Then, I made a specific request, a top-tier model, a cash purchase, and a preference to bypass a specific salesman. Instead of processing that request, you defaulted to the judgment of the salesman in question, who confirmed your initial assessment. You then attempted to redirect me to a lower-value product tier, the pre-owned lot. At every stage, your system chose the path of least respect. That's not a lapse, Henderson. That's the system working as designed. He sank back into his chair, the last bit of fight draining out of him. He was my top guy, he whispered. He moved units. I backed my guy. You backed a bug, I said, the words sharp and clean. A recursive loop of arrogance that was costing the company money. You just couldn't see it because you were part of the same corrupted code. He finally looked up, and for the first time I saw something beyond fear in his eyes. A flicker of dawning, horrified comprehension. He wasn't just sorry he got caught. He was beginning to understand that his entire framework was wrong. That was the accountability I needed to see. I took out my phone. I'm not going to get you your job back. His face fell. That function has been terminated, but an error, once understood, can be repurposed. I found Arthur Vance's number and hit call. Henderson watched me, his expression a mixture of terror and hope. Arthur, I said when he answered. A follow-up on the Northwood dealership. I saw Henderson flinch. Your system has a vulnerability, not a technical one, a human one. Your managers are incentivized to back top salesmen, even when they're toxic assets. Your floor staff aren't trained to look past the surface of a customer. You're losing money you don't even know you're losing. I paused, letting him process. I'm going to send you a proposal, a new initiative. Customer Experience Integrity Program. We build a new training module, new metrics, a new bonus structure based on something other than raw unit sales. We implement a chain-wide secret shopper system to ensure compliance. We make respect the primary protocol. I looked at the broken man sitting across from me. And you need someone to run it. Someone who understands the old broken system better than anyone. Someone who has seen firsthand the cost of a null pointer exception. I listened for a moment, then glanced at Henderson. His name is Henderson. He's currently unemployed. I think he's the most qualified candidate you have. I ended the call and looked at him. He was staring at me, his mouth slightly agape, as if I'd just spoken to him in a language he was only beginning to comprehend. I hadn't just gotten him fired. I had rewritten his entire career path. I hadn't brute-forced a solution. I had analyzed a system failure and deployed a patch. A quiet, clean satisfaction settled in my chest, displacing the sour shame. This was the power of being the architect. Not just to destroy, but to rebuild. To find a bug and write a better, more elegant function. I hadn't just fixed the problem at one dealership. I had started to debug the entire chain, and in doing so, I had finally debugged myself. 2 months later, the keys to the Acura felt like just keys. The new car smell had faded into a familiar background scent, and the silent, effortless power of the engine was no longer alien, but simply a fact. I spent most of my time offline now, walking through city parks, sitting in cafes without a laptop, and just watching the chaotic, inefficient, beautiful mess of the human world go by. I was trying to learn a new language, one written not in syntax and symbols, but in shared glances, tired smiles, and the thousand small kindnesses that hold society together. The memory of giving Mr. Harrison the Accord is the one I return to when the static of the dealership incident gets too loud. I'd driven it to his house the next day, a modest little bungalow with a perfectly tended garden. He was in the front yard, pulling weeds. When I pulled up, he just shielded his eyes, watching me get out. I held out the keys. "I was in the neighborhood," I said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "I thought you could use an upgrade, for all the flames you're still fanning." He looked from the keys to the gleaming blue sedan, then back to my face. He didn't cry or shout. He just took the keys, his hand calloused from years of chalk dust and gardening, and closed his fingers around them. He walked over to the car, ran a hand over the hood, and then turned back to me, his kind eyes shining. "You were always building something wonderful, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud to see what you've built for yourself." In that moment, there was no debt. No transaction, just a closed loop, perfectly and elegantly executed. Tonight, for the first time in weeks, I sit down at my desk and open my laptop. The screen glows, but it no longer feels like an interrogation. It feels like a workbench. The blinking cursor isn't a judgment, it's an invitation. The shame has receded, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. I'm not hacking a corporation or mining for data. I'm building something. On the screen are the wireframes and logic flows for a new training module. The title at the top of the page reads, Vance Auto Group, Customer Experience Integrity Program. Arthur had been ecstatic. Henderson, after a long, stunned silence on the phone with me, had accepted the new role with a kind of terrified reverence. He sends me a progress report every Friday. He's running the pilot program himself. He's learning to see people, not price tags. My fingers begin to move across the keyboard, the familiar clatter a comforting rhythm in the quiet room. I'm designing an interactive simulation, a game of sorts for the sales staff. They'll be presented with avatars of customers from all walks of life. A young kid in a hoodie, a single mom with a strict budget, an elderly couple who are nervous about new technology. The goal isn't just to sell a car. The goal is to get a 5-star rating in respect, to listen, to solve a problem. The code flows from my fingertips, clean and logical. It's not a weapon, it's not a shield. It's a tool for building a better system, one line at a time. The ghost in the hoodie isn't gone. He's just learned that the most elegant code isn't the one that breaks the old system, but the one that builds a new one with a place for everyone. And for the first time, that feels like a sanctuary worth defending. I look at the code taking shape on my screen, the architecture of the training module. It feels right. It feels clean. It's a loop, but not a vicious one. It's a feedback loop designed to reward empathy. It's a system designed to see the person, not the sales opportunity. The kid in the library, the one who just wanted to build things in peace, would have loved this. He spent so long building walls to keep people out. I'm finally using those same skills to build a door and invite them in. This whole journey started with a debt to one man, Mr. Harrison, but it ended with a debt to that kid, the kid who was made to feel small for being smart. The payoff wasn't watching Mark's world crumble. It was watching Mr. Harrison's eyes light up. It wasn't the cold satisfaction of firing Henderson. It was the quiet pride of seeing him, in his weekly reports, start to use words like dignity and respect. I didn't just fix a bug. I helped rewrite a man's source code. My old sanctuary was a command line, a place of solitude. My new one is a system of connection, a network of people learning to be a little kinder to the next weirdo who walks through their door. It turns out the best firewalls aren't the ones that keep the world out, but the ones that protect the best parts of ourselves so we can share them. It's about making a little more space for everyone. And if you believe in making space for others and building better, more elegant systems instead of just breaking the old ones, you know what to do. It's just nice to know there are people out there building it with you. Hit that like button and subscribe.